May the 20th, 2021. Guys, you're looking at current satellite images this morning from over the Gulf of Mexico. You can see the Bay of Campeche, northeastern Caribbean. Now, Louisiana and Texas, you guys have really been catching it, and us here in central Mississippi have been catching it. But as far as tornadoes and rain, but guys, central Louisiana has been under the gun for a few days. And 2 days ago, people in Lake Charles were canoeing through the streets. A lot of homes damaged, a lot of cars damaged, things like that. Massive flooding. And that's continuing right now as we speak. I mentioned this in a video a couple nights ago as it was the tornado warnings that were coming up into Mississippi from a system in the Gulf, and I said it was rotating counterclockwise like a tropical depression right in the center. The Gulf of Mexico water temperatures are very warm, and we are just a few days from official hurricane season on June 1st. Now, the last 2 years, by the 15th of May, we were getting tropical systems in the Atlantic, and they broke records for being that early. They're thinking about for next year's season moving the official start to hurricane season to May the 15th. We'll see how that works. But guys, when your shields are weak and we're in grand solar minimum, a lot more UV radiation and heating radiation is transferred through those shields. The shields don't collect it. In other words, it passes through and you get a scattering effect. And that's why you have the extreme sunburns we've been having for the last few years during the summer. Doesn't take much, guys, so be very careful. Have UV protection eyewear also. But in the Bay of Campeche, guys, which is in the bottom left of this section here, we need to kind of watch this system because we are approaching that time of the year. And I think what we're dealing with, you guys in Louisiana, it was really flooding all the way through Texas and north. You can see this continuing path. But there was a tropical depression trying to form. I'm not saying it formed, but there was a very strong center of circulation that came up through central or eastern Louisiana up into Mississippi during that tornado warning a few videos ago. I'm seeing the same type action now in the Bay of Campeche, so we want to keep an eye on this. Now, today is the 20th, and we do have a system that they're watching that's in the Atlantic. Let's take a look at that. Now, this is a wide Atlantic view. You can see some of the dust that's starting to move off the African continent here just north of the equator, and this is where your systems, the Atlantic systems, usually start to form. Coming off that coast, you'll see it, and they'll strengthen, come through the Caribbean or north of the Caribbean. But right now, 600 miles east of Bermuda, they're watching this system, and it has a 90% chance of development over the next 5 days and an 80% chance of development over the next 48 hours. It's becoming stationary, and it's going to move back to the left or west towards Bermuda, and they think by that time it will be caught up in a front and moved north and northeast, probably affecting the northeast tips of North America. But again, the seasons are starting, and I think Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi, all this flooding rains that we're beginning is because the Gulf of Mexico is trying to crank up. And again, mentioning grand solar minimum, guys, we will be very fortunate if we don't go through another devastating hurricane season. Perdido Key, Florida, Pensacola, Florida, last year, and then you had Michael come into Florida down before that, and you had the different storms come into Louisiana and Texas. It was just, I think we had 21, 22 storms last year. Well, we're getting ready to crank this back up, so just keep in mind, if you're planning to travel and through the Gulf or do any cruises or things like that, pay very close attention to this weather. Now, the storm that's off, again, 600 miles east of Bermuda does not seem to be a threat to the U.S. at this time, but it is a sign of the times, and we are rapidly approaching storm season. As you can, if you look along the equator, here about halfway between Africa and Central America, You can see there's slight rotation here. Now, these things more than likely will die out, be absorbed by the dust storm until they strengthen and you get less upper level wind shear that's moving from left to right or from west to east in this picture. When that starts to die down, things will be more conducive. And we know these dust storms, it's called the Saharan dust layer, they will absorb some of the hurricanes and storms that come off simply because sand will absorb moisture. And moisture is what hurricanes feed off of, especially warm moisture. So that's what we're dealing with now. Also, we've talked about the drought, and we've talked about dams being shut off in the California-Oregon border in the last few videos, and the drought throughout the U.S. Southwest. But guys, in South America, in that area where you got a lot of coffee, you've got sugar, you've got other oranges that they raise there, and of course coffee is a huge export. They're in mega drought situations now. Normally they have a few lakes and reservoirs that the farmers there will draw from during the warm summer months, and they will usually have enough to get them to the end of August. And they're running dry now. They've had to pump so much water, and there's evaporation. So when you're dealing with a worldwide situation, that's going to really jack the prices up on food and other things if they're available. So you think about coffee and, like I said, sugar, oranges that come from that area. Of course, coffee is worldwide, and that will jack the cost of coffee up a lot. You may want to think about that in your preps. But this is what we're dealing with. We're going to have an extreme season. If I had to bet my years of experience on watching these storms, which goes back to 1964-65 season, when Hurricane Betsy did a number on New Orleans. Now they have a few kind of token streetcars, but back then it was kind of like San Francisco. You had a lot of these electric trolley cars, but the storm damage from them was devastating, even as far south as the tip of the Mississippi River, because we happened to live down south of Port Sulphur in Buras at that time. I was in the 4th grade, and we evacuated, came back to Mississippi. And it was a good thing because the Mississippi River, with the high levees there, and especially south of New Orleans, is much higher than the land below it. In other words, these levees are pretty high hills, and when you have a breach of a levee like that, that's a lot of moisture that floods into all the areas there. But anyway, guys, I just wanted to give you a heads up on this. I want you to be prepared for a pretty rough summer. We're kind of getting it from all angles, if you understand what I'm saying. But be prepared for this. Be prepared for food shortages. It's a heads up, guys. Be safe.